Trump is in his second term. Republicans came out of 2024 with control of both chambers. The House majority is there, but not massive, and the Senate sits at roughly 53-47 Republican. That split isn't random. It reflects a structural tilt in the Senate toward more Republican-leaning, smaller, and often listening to Sentinel briefing. I'm Major Ethan Sentinel Graves. Let's set the board for 2026. Picture this. TRN more rural states. 2 senators per state means a voter in Wyoming, in representational terms, weighs a lot more than a voter in California. That's the terrain. Now, historically, midterms are bad news for the president's party. There are exceptions, but if you're betting based on history, you expect the White House party to lose House seats, sometimes a lot. The big driver, over and over, is presidential job approval. If the president is underwater, more disapprove than approve, that's usually a red flare for the president's party down ballot. Then you've got the generic ballot, if the election were held today, would you vote for the Democrat or the Republican for Congress question? It's not perfect, but directionally, it tells you which way the wind's blowing nationally. And then there's exposure, which folks don't talk about enough. Exposure is just, how many vulnerable seats does each party already hold? If Republicans have snapped up a bunch of marginal Biden-leaning or swing districts in 2024, they're defending more turf in 2026. That matters a lot, even in a good Republican climate. Okay, what does the actual 2026 battle space look like? On the House side, you've got swing districts, suburban seats that once leaned Republican but trended Democratic in the Trump and post-Trump years, and also some working-class areas that swung the other way toward the GOP. Those are the knife fight districts. Layer on top the ongoing redistricting and legal fights. States like Texas and North Carolina have been in constant map warfare. Virginia and a handful of others could see litigation and tweaks too, depending on how courts rule. A couple of lines moved on a map can decide the majority when the House margin is narrow. Demographically, the pressure points are pretty clear. High education suburbs around big metros have in many places become friendlier turf for Democrats, while a lot of working-class regions, especially with more non-college, white, and in some cases Latino voters, have moved right. Meanwhile, big diverse metros keep churning out more Democratic votes, but turnout and enthusiasm are not automatic. So the 2026 operational picture is this: a structurally right-leaning Senate, a House map that's been fought over in courtrooms as much as in campaigns, and a midterm cycle where Trump's approval rating, the generic ballot, and which party is overexposed in marginal seats will decide who takes or keeps the high ground. Let's run PESL Scenario Alpha. Republicans hold the line in 2026. In this world, the GOP keeps the House, maybe loses a couple of seats here and there, but protects the majority, and holds that 53-4-7-ish Senate, maybe even nudges it up a seat or two. That means Republican control of the committee gavels continues. In the House, judiciary and oversight stay in conservative hands. So you're looking at ongoing investigative pressure on the administration's opponents, Democratic state officials, remaining Biden-Harris-era appointees, buried in the bureaucracy, and any parts of the federal government seen as unfriendly to Trump's agenda. On the Senate side, Republican leadership on judiciary, foreign relations, homeland security, you name it, keeps the confirmation and oversight machinery pointed in a conservative direction. Policy-wise, what actually moves? With narrow margins and a fractious GOP conference, you don't get a blank check. You'd likely see a sustained push on immigration and border enforcement, more resources for enforcement, tighter asylum rules, maybe fights over things like E-Verify or interior enforcement. Election law and voter ID will stay on the docket. Proposals to standardize stricter ID, tighten up mail voting rules, and clash with blue states that liberalized access over the last decade. Deregulation and energy are constant themes in a Trump-era GOP Congress. Easing environmental and climate-related regulations, promoting fossil fuel production and infrastructure, and trying to rein in federal agencies they see as overstepping. And of course, judicial confirmations remain a top-tier priority. With a Republican Senate, you'd expect a steady pipeline of conservative judges, especially to the appellate courts. The catch is factionalism. You've got hardline conservatives, populists, institutionalists, maybe a few remaining moderates, passing big-ticket legislation, especially anything touching entitlements or sweeping immigration reforms, is hard when 5 or 10 House members can sink a bill. So you get a lot of investigations, messaging bills, and targeted policies that can unify the conference. On the risk side, a continued Republican Congress under Trump too likely intensifies blue state resistance. Expect Democratic governors and attorneys general to push back in court against federal moves on immigration, voting rules, and climate. You could see localized protests, legal noncompliance battles, and a patchwork of policy where red and blue states increasingly diverge. Markets, historically, like gridlock and predictability. A stable Republican Congress with known priorities might be seen as relatively predictable on taxes and regulation, though any major brinkmanship over debt ceilings or shutdowns could rattle things. Internationally, allies would be reading this as confirmation that Trump's governing style isn't a fluke. Congress isn't going to constrain him much. That can cut both ways. Some adversaries may test U.S. resolve, while some partners hedge, unsure if U.S. commitments will be consistent. Oversight fights would likely zero in on Democratic-run states, election administration, immigration sanctuary policies, and use of federal funds. The upshot of Scenario Alpha: Republicans consolidate control, the legislative agenda focuses on enforcement, deregulation, and judges, and the real action may shift to state capitals and the courts as the opposition tries to block or blunt what Washington does. Now flip the board. Peaceful Scenario Bravo. Democrats win the 2026 midterms. That can mean two different things. Version 1. They flip the House, but the Senate stays narrowly Republican. Version 2. The heavier lift. They take both chambers by razor-thin margins. How do you get there? Historically, remember, the president's party almost always loses House seats in midterms, especially if job approval is weak. If Trump's approval drifts down and the generic ballot starts leaning Democratic by a few points, that's the classic recipe for a House flip. Democrats would also need solid recruitment in swing seats and strong fundraising to exploit Republican overexposure in marginal districts. The Senate is tougher because of that structural tilt to the right. Democrats would need a very favorable map and a national environment clearly running in their direction. Think generic ballot and special election overperformance just to squeak out 50 or 51 seats. So what happens if they pull it off? Politically, if Democrats only win the House, you get split control. They can block a lot of Trump's legislative agenda, control the purse strings, and run aggressive oversight. But Republican leadership in the Senate can still protect judicial nominees and act as a firewall on most legislation. If Democrats somehow take both chambers, you get full congressional opposition to a Republican president, which historically leads to grinding gridlock and constant confrontation. On policy and oversight, Democrats would almost certainly prioritize investigations of the Trump administration, conflicts of interest, executive branch conduct, implementation of immigration and border policies, and interactions with state governments. Committees would ramp up subpoenas and hearings in a way that mirrors and answers what Republican committees were doing before the flip. Legislative efforts would zero in on protecting or expanding voting rights, trying to set national baselines for ballot access, early voting, and resisting restrictive ID laws. They'd also push to protect or restore abortion access where they can, though a conservative Supreme Court would limit how far Congress can go. On immigration, climate, and healthcare, you'd see attempts to check or reverse Trump-era policies, codifying protections, funding climate and clean energy programs, and defending or shoring up existing healthcare frameworks. But with Trump still in the White House, veto power is a brick wall. Even with both chambers, Democrats would struggle to push through big reforms without some Republican crossover. So you get lots of bills passed by Congress that die at the resolute desk, and lots of bargaining around must-pass items like budgets and national security. Comparing Alpha and Bravo, you get two very different stress profiles. In Alpha, legislative throughput for conservative priorities is higher, but institutional strain shifts to blue states and the courts. In Bravo, throughput on big policy changes is low because of vetoes, and the strain moves inside Washington, subpoena fights, executive privilege battles, and a steady drip of investigations. In both futures, public trust is at risk. One side sees its victories questioned, the other sees its institutions weaponized. So what do you watch in 2025 and early 2026 as early warning? First, the presidential job approval trend direction over time matters more than a single poll. Second, the generic ballot. Does either party build a consistent edge? Third, money and talent fundraising numbers, and whether strong candidates are stepping up or sitting out, especially in swing districts and key Senate races. Finally, turnout signals in special elections and primaries. If one side keeps overperforming expectations, that's usually a canary in the coal mine. I'm Major Ethan Sentinel Graves. That's your 2026 midterm battle space, plus Alpha and Bravo sketched out. We'll keep refining these scenarios as new data hits. Until next time, stay alert, stay informed, and I'll see you on the next briefing.